Welcome to the Reconciliation Conversation. We want this podcast to be a space where we can expose hate, encourage love, equip for healthy reconciliation, and emphasize unity so that all people can know their value together as one. Welcome to another episode of the Reconciliation Conversation. As always, it is a pleasure to have you guys with us, and I'm excited for our guest today. This wonderful woman is an anti-racism cultural specialist. She's a writer. She's an author of What Lies Between Us, a journal and guide for fostering first steps towards racial healing. She's a TED talker, senior consultant for the American Dream Game. She's a doctor where she received her Ph.D. in education from Iowa State University. She is married to her wonderful husband, Nathan, and they have 3 little girls who are actually an inspiration for Brownicity, which we're going to talk about later on today. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you all Dr. Lucretia Berry. Dr. Berry, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. I can't even complain. I just am so full of gratitude, and I'm so grateful to be here. So thank you for inviting me, Jason and Derrick.
No doubt. Well, thank you for joining us. Well, let's jump in. We want to start with what's most important. Obviously, what it is like to be a mom in this current cultural moment that we're in. You know, I know it's a challenge as parents. Jason and I are having conversations with our kids, so we assuming that you're having conversations as well. In those conversations, what do you hope that your kids are going to remember from their childhood with regard to what their parents are emphasizing the most right now?
Right. And that's so interesting that you asked that question, because I've never thought about it this way. Mm-hmm. But, you know, these conversations around race, racism, anti-racism are so common in our family. I remember my the second child asking me years ago, like, "Mommy, how come all your books are about whatever, like skin tone?" That's what she would call it. Mm-hmm. And I said, because people don't really know, like they don't understand. And, you know, and I've told my children, like, you know far more than most adults about, you know, skin tone, race, racism, anti-racism. And I think that, they thought I was making that up until they started to see on the news and, you know, just in society, all of here's the things that they've known and we've been talking about. And suddenly these conversations that we've been having just around our kitchen table and in very casual ways, now they're seeing that the emphasis on, you know, the news, and, you know, they're seeing, you know, even school curriculum shifting focus to emphasize equipping and empowering, you know, students so that they aren't just kind of left in the dark about what is going on. And, you know, so we have always taught them to question systemic authority, you know, and of course they probably at this age wouldn't use that language, like, "Mom, we are questioning systemic," but, you know, but for example, they, like, when certain commercials come on television, like, we totally dissect the commercials. You know, we talk about certain, especially political ads, like, "Oh, how does this make you feel?" You know, when they comment, "Well, how does that make you feel?" And so why do you think that they're targeting or focusing on this or using these words? Like, why do you think that they're perpetuating fear? You know, or something like, so again, like they know how to ask these questions. I'm hoping that they have learned, and again, they wouldn't be able to articulate it this way, but that we as individuals, as humans, as people, you know, as a society, should not abdicate our power to politicians and people with more social, economic, and political power. Because just because you have more money or more political status, or, you know, for my children, more social media status, it doesn't mean that, you know what's best for me, that I should be following your lead. And it also doesn't mean that I am not capable of creating the change that is necessary, like, or I am not capable of imagining and then cultivating a world that is possible. So they've watched, you know, their mom and dad, you know, create. So, you know, have these conversations, and through the word, you know, manifest and attempt to manifest what we believe is possible. And so that's a recognizing of our, of our own personal power and then our power as a collective. So again, I don't think that they can articulate it that way, but I do believe that they are practicing it and they have been practicing it. And so it's just normal and it makes sense for what's happening right now.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing that.
So let's kind of move from there, because I keep going deeper into that, because many use one humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like unpack that thought a little bit and talk about what inspired Brownicity.
Okay, great. So our family is multi-ethnic. I am African American. My husband is white American. He probably would identify mostly as Italian, his Italian heritage, and knows more about that background. And so actually we met doing the work of integrating a historically Black church. So we have a background in like anti-racism work, both academically and practicing it in our lives. So when we got married, we were not naive about our children's unique struggle as multi-ethnic children navigating our very hyper-racialized society. So me growing up in the South as an African American, I was given a particular set of tools to navigate our hyper-racialized society. And my husband, growing up in Iowa as a white male would, of course, have had a different set of tools. But yeah, we had to be intentional about, okay, how are we going to prepare and equip our children? And anecdotes like, well, this is what we heard people saying a lot. Well, mama or daddy is chocolate and mama's vanilla and you are chocolate and vanilla swirl. Okay. Yeah, no, that's not good enough.
No.
Like, you can't stand on that. You can't build on that, on ice cream. You can't build your identity on ice cream.
It's going to melt.
Oh, yes. See, I hadn't even thought about that. It's going to melt. And then they're confused. Lord.
Help us, Jesus. Help us.
So we made room for like dialogue, thinking, and dreaming beyond the binary, bipolar, Black, white, racial categories. And so, humanity is complex and, multi everything. Yes. And we just wanted to make sure that we made space for that, in our family, in our home. And we wanted to give our children the essence of who they are, but also understand, when we walk out of this door, out of our home as a multi-ethnic family, what society will try to impose on us. So with that, when our oldest was only 4 years old, she said she observed that we were all hues of brown. She said, "Mommy, you're dark brown and Daddy is light brown and I'm medium brown." Yeah. And we loved how she, had recognized the oneness of the human family, of our family, right? And we were like, "Oh, that's brilliant." And so with that, we talked to her about melanin. And of course, Mommy has more melanin because of where her ancestors were located geographically, and they wouldn't have needed protection, from the sun. And Daddy has less because of his ancestors and where they're located, and they would have needed to absorb more of the sun's rays. So again, stuff like that is plain, simple. It makes sense. You give your kids frameworks because they're always trying to make sense of what is going on in the world. And so they can see, research shows that, by the time they are 5, they're categorizing people, and by the time they're 7, they can mimic or and mirror the social status, the social hierarchies of race that are present in our society. And so we wanted to make sure that they, had this language. So anyway, brown comes from that we are all hues of brown, like melanin. Brown represents the word melanin, and then icity comes from the word ethnicity. And ethnicity means that which we have in common. So like many hues, one humanity is an expression of that. And then brownicity, it's just the representation of, our daughter that's how she would describe people. So-and-so is brown like me, but has straight black hair, or so-and-so is, brown like Daddy, but has gold hair, or so-and-so. She would even say, so-and-so is brown like me, but looks like her ancestors may have been from China, so.
Wow.
I know, right? So it gave us the scope. We needed to have more complex and sophisticated conversations, not, but also we did not negate the history of race in our country and race as a construct.
Yeah. No, I love that. So I too, so my wife is white. And so our two kids, my daughter is fair skinned. My son is just a little bit lighter than I am. And then obviously my wife. My son, when he's around 3 or 4, without he would actually do the same categorization of brown. Where he's like, it was like during the summertime when Rachel would tan up a little bit, right? And he said, Daddy's dark brown, I'm, medium brown, True's light brown, Mommy's white brown is what he would say.
Oh, wow. I like white brown.
And white brown, right? And it's like, and as you were telling that, with your daughter, it's like, man, it's so interesting how kids, how they view the world, right? How they are taking these things in. And, the fact that you've, kind of walked through that with your children, not only your children, but so many others now, to kind of begin to build this framework out is just super encouraging. I love it.
No, thank you.
So good.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So obviously the work that you're doing with anti-racism and things like that, what would you say are 3 essentials that you view as musts when you engage in teaching foundational anti-racism education for liberation?
Yes, great question. As you know, I developed a curriculum, which is called What Lies Between Us. And I've been teaching it for years. And because What Lies Between Us, I developed to be taught in churches. So when I was invited to schools and companies, you can't take scripture. So I called it, I have the same educational units, the same everything, just without, the scripture. And it's called Foundations. But I feel like, people need the same to get a good start, to get a good understanding, to expand their scope, or to condition themselves to move forward in a healthy way. You have to have an understanding of history, number one, and not just European centered, or centric history, but the history of, the United States, and the history of how race was created and used as a caste system in the United States, and how it has worked into every system, and then has of course, perpetuated and narrated our beliefs and our practices as communities and individuals. You have got to understand that. You might not have to, you don't necessarily have to know every date, every policy, every law, but you do have to understand the mechanism and how it was created, invented, implemented, and is still doing its job 400 years later. So number one, I feel like it's like you don't even have room to ask the right questions if you don't, have an understanding or have access to, the history. And then number 2, you have to have an analytical lens for systems, because, in our American culture, we tend to be very individual focused, right? I remember growing up in school learning about rugged individualism. Well, first of all, I know that is not a thing, it's a myth. Everybody is depending upon everybody, and everybody needs some help, and everybody has gotten, well, most groups have gotten help. I'll just say it that way. So, but you have to be able to think, have an analytical lens for systems and how, machines, mechanisms work together. We falsely believe in the rugged individualism and, meritocracy, like, oh, this person got here because of their hard work. Well, lots of people work hard, because even in church, aren't we taught that Jesus is our personal savior, right? So that's even been personalized, and we don't even think
I'm
about
glad that you had to go back to that. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was like, important. So
that's right.
Yeah. And it's like, Jesus is talking to all these people, and then we just make it about me. Like, he's talking to me. So you have to have an analytical lens for systems, community, and then and number 3, you have to have an analytical lens, or I'll just say introspection of self. And so again, a lot of people want to focus on what they did, like they, them, not me, not me. But we have all been kind of just marinated in, generations of systemic racism or systemic injustice. And so it has impacted all of us. And so we all sit in this trauma. I call it, we sit in this wound of trauma, and we all need to be healed. So that's why, even in my curriculum, which is for beginners, a major part of it is people engaging in introspection. Like I write these questions, I wrote these questions that you must ask yourself in order to get your brain to search for some answers, or to search within, or to even recognize how you have been impacted. And the funny thing about when I do have the introspection, if people haven't met me and they're just reading the book, sometimes their own, fear or shame or guilt, get in the way. And I'm speaking specifically of white people, and they go, she's trying to make us feel guilty or something. And I'm like, no, I'm really not doing that. Yeah. Honestly, the curriculum that I developed is a model or a mirror of my own racial healing journey. Wow, I had to heal. Right. I had to heal from, narratives, ideas, practices, and beliefs. And so, the questions that are there, having this self lens is so important to our healing individually, and as a community, and as a nation.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Talk about just how it's possible for families to actually engage with Brownicity and the things that you train in.
That's actually my favorite part of this work, is working with kids and teaching kids. I don't know if you know this, but I teach Antiracism 101 to high school students.
Awesome.
It's so much fun. And then I'm also a consultant for the school, and I get to go into the elementary classrooms and read books and talk to the children. And they are not full of fear, and it's not intimidating. It's like they are so glad that someone came in and gave them some positive language and some knowledge and permission. And then it's like opening a box or open the floodgates. And then they just have all these wonderful questions, and they have very sophisticated conversations. And this is what their teachers tell me, like, okay, after you came and did your workshop or did your thing, I overhear my kids saying these things. And teachers will say, before, I would not have allowed my children, I would have hushed them or silenced them, but they got it, And we talk about leaders who are creative and use the creativity to disrupt the status quo. When I designed a curriculum, or when I design events to gather people, to educate them, there's always the aspect, it's always pointing towards the children. And so it's equipping parents, equipping teachers to engage with kids. So even when we've done our virtual 5-week courses, there's a whole module called Engaging with Kids. So as parents or teachers or whomever, adults, pastors, youth pastors, as you're going through week by week, there is something there for you to either bring your children into the conversation or to engage kids into the conversation as you learn, because we can all be learning together. And so we have to kind of do double duty to fill the gaps we have, or to fill in the deficit. And so it's like we have to move forward and and get education ourselves, but also educate our children, because we don't want them to be we don't want them to be neglected the way that we were, when we weren't given this knowledge and understanding through our institutions of education, like schools and churches. So that's my heartbeat. And that's why I do this work from such a place of hope, I think, because I get to work with and focus a lot of my work towards children.
My family, because of where I grew up, we've tried to say that person is a lighter skinned or a darker skinned. We've tried to honor the colorfulness of each other and the beauty of it. In a similar way, I've tried hard to try to help our girls especially understand the beautiful leaders that they could be. You're a brilliant leader, in my opinion, period. Right? Like you happen to be female. And so I'm not trying to get you in trouble with any of the male leaders around you. But I think especially if there are male leaders listening that have been in dominantly male leadership cultures, right? It's sometimes helpful to get a perspective from an incredibly sharp female leader or a great leader who happens to be female, like I said. And so what would you challenge a lot of the male leaders out there that maybe haven't taken some of the steps you've taken to even cultivate for a change in this arena, right? How would you challenge them, no matter the color or the hue of their skin?
Right. Mm-hmm.
How would you challenge them as male leaders just to think maybe a little bit differently in the midst of this moment?
I think the answer is in your question. What you said, can you think differently? I read that and I was like, oh, this is a challenging question. So I'll see if I can answer it, because yes. And to your point, I think I feel like, again, in our culture, leadership, it can often be just kind of relegated or minimized or limited to like a traditionally male or patriarchal image. And initially I wrote, well, let's be like moms. Can we all just be like moms? But some moms aren't, some people, yeah. So I'm like, I had to throw that out, like, and delete. So I deleted that out. Like, but, can we have leadership that can be focused on nurturing, care for building people, understanding that we're all siblings over being competitive. Yes, it's a competitive and conquering, because that, is a common approach for leadership. And it's often associated. I mean, I know women, can be that way as well too. So, but I think that's the leadership model that we've accepted for so long. And so we just all make room for leadership models that are not so maybe competitive and based on conquering. And how many people at your church today, or how many people, what if, or how many people, if we could focus on, building people. I have cooperative and collaborative over competitive and conquering. I love to see, and I try to be as a leader, vulnerable. So telling the truth about, in this work that I do, and I'm so fortunate that I have been able to, I'm going to say, mentor my father-in-law, who he is Pastor Berry. He is a white, he would call himself or consider himself a white evangelical pastor, in Iowa, pastoring a multi-ethnic church, has been for decades. He's about to retire, but I'm fortunate to be able to mentor him. And it's like, Dad, the way you've pastored the church, when you move forward into like this ministry of racial healing and anti-racism, you have to move in a different energy. And so vulnerability, letting people see your journey, telling your story, starting with your faults, most leaders don't want to do that. Starting with your faults, your insecurities, your weaknesses, and like those things, leading out of those and allowing people to kind of, to lean into your vulnerability is so necessary. And I have never seen that fail in this area of racial healing and anti-racism. When someone says, a leader says, I used to think this, or I used to think this, and then I learned this, and now I do this. People listen. People listen. So nobody wants the whole, like, let me preach at you about white privilege, or let me preach at you about, like, no, that's not the energy that we can move forward. And then we need creativity, because, we can't keep perpetuating this racial status quo. And oftentimes traditional ways of leadership do perpetuate the racism.
It's really good. And that the reason I asked, I love that you answered it the way you did, because I was hoping. Let me tell you why I asked the question. I asked it because I feel like I keep noticing, not only in myself but in others as well, the blockage or some of the impasses that are present because of just the normal way we've done leadership, or and so how sometimes having another perspective doesn't matter that you're female or not.
Right.
But it just so happens that being a female, though, you do bring sometimes, this is a stereotype, I get it. But stereotypically as a female leader, you're going to bring some empathy to the table that oftentimes we don't have. You're going to bring some other perspectives emotionally to the table that are incredibly helpful, right? Like we haven't translated some of these things into our emotions. And so my heart in asking the question was very much we could learn. We could submit to the learning and the insights of a great leader who happens to be female, and quit acting like we know how to do all this. I think we would sharpen each other. That was the heart behind it. So I really appreciate you answering that.
Oh, that was good. And I do feel that it's because of how we have marginalized as a society. We've marginalized women to a degree. But I've always said, look, in the margins, I've been over there in the margins doing all kinds of wonderful things. So I will.
I love that.
All the wonderful things I've been doing in the margins. Yeah. I'll, if you mentor me, then you get to benefit. You see?
Yeah. I love that. It's like, listen, I've got my table over here. I've been eating at this table over here. I love that. I love that wordplay. Golly. That's good. That's good.
That's good.
Well, Dr. Berry, in wrapping up, obviously we always, try to give our listeners some, application, some next steps that they need to be taken in their own personal life. And we always want to ask, our guests, what are one or two takeaways that you would give our listeners? What's a next step that they can take, in seeking to live a life of reconciliation, or, as you say in a lot of your training, liberation? What are some of the next steps that some of our listeners should be taking?
Well, I mean, my number one step, I'm an educator, so I'm always going to say education. And I believe education is a powerful tool to help people grow, not only in consciousness and competence, but in confidence. And so when you learn this stuff, you become more confident. You don't feel like the insecure, like idiot. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm afraid I'm going to do the wrong thing. Like, no, you're standing on solid ground. And for me, I feel like education, and it was all God designed. So, education was what opened up the capacity for me to get the revelation about transformation. So I had to know first, right? I had to know first, and then I could hear about, what to do and how to move forward. So number one is education. And then number two, I really do think people you need a support group, because when you begin to, when you can say that again out loud. When you start growing, and expanding, and, not being the popular kid anymore or whatever. You need some cheerleaders. You need some hand holding, somebody to hug you when you feel alone, because that's a part of a learning journey, especially when it's, when it's pushed up against, I'll just say when it's the beginning of a shift that has been, 400 years in the making, so you need a support group.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Berry, and we appreciate you. We want our listeners to know where they can continue to learn, where they can follow you. You're on social media. What's your handle for different people so they know how to stay in touch with you?
Well, I love Instagram. So I'm Lucretia Berry, but Brownicity is Brownicity, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And so we're always teaching there and at brownicity.com. Awesome. And you didn't necessarily give, too much
a way for people to, hit you up if they wanted to find out more about, your study guide and things like that. Mm-hmm. But if someone wanted to, a church leader or, a school or something, like, hey, we want to learn in this, we want to grow in this, how can they connect with you in that so they can, maybe get you to come and teach them a little bit or get a hold of your work?
Yeah, you can email or contact us at connect@brownicity.com, or just go to brownicity.com and click on the connect button.
Perfect. Love it. Well, Dr. Berry, we want to thank you for your time, and for our listeners, thank you again for tuning in on the Reconciliation Conversation. We'll join you, not join you, you'll join us next time as we continue the conversation. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining in on the Reconciliation Conversation. Remember, you can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Recon Convo. You can also stay connected with us through our website, reconciliationconversation.com, or feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel under No More Night Media. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you next time.